All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we have a sponsored stream, but guess who sponsored it? You guys did. This is your guys' sponsor stream from the last time that I offered the 50 Super Chat goal. I told you guys that if we achieved it, you could choose the next sponsored stream, in which you guys chose a stream on Tsar St. Nicholas II, and as requested was a section on Rasputin. So that's exactly what we got in store for today. Now, this is going to be the last stream this week because I'm actually flying out to Texas early tomorrow morning over to work with the Wilsons on a new project. I'll be seeing Chase Haggard, who unironically looks exactly like Tsar Nicholas. So shout out to Chase and the Wilsons. I'll be heading out there tomorrow. But today, there's a lot to unpack. I already see people in the chat are asking if I read the Rasputin archive over on Substack. Yes, I'm familiar. I watched Anthony Westgate's conversation with the Rasputin archive. I think his name is Alex. Very good little conversation. And so I am not a Rasputin hater. But today what we're going to do is really try to cut through some of the biases on both sides, right? So, for example, with Tsar Nicholas II. Now, he is a saint of our Orthodox Church. And at the same time, when it comes to being a Tsar of Russia, he wasn't exactly the most successful Tsar in Russian history. He wasn't exactly Peter the Great or Catherine the Great. Unfortunately, his reign is marked by a lot of turmoil. Most specifically with the aristocracy, the peasantry, and obviously the Bolshevik, culminating in the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. But as an individual, and this is what we're going to be talking about today regarding St. Nicholas, is as an individual, incredible man. And fortunately, he basically sat at the crux between two timelines. He was leading a pre-modern monarchical Russia with centralized power at a point in which all of Europe was modernizing. And we're going to be giving credit where credit is due. So I have a lot of attempts to actually steelman and bolster Tsar Nicholas, because in preparation for today's stream, looking at all these secular archives or articles, man, the secular scholars do not do any favors for St. Nicholas, Tsar Nicholas II, or Rasputin. Outside of the Rasputin archive over on Substack, you're not going to get really anything that is positive towards Rasputin. And even a channel that I've talked about here on YouTube, Kings and Generals, they have a video asking if Tsar Nicholas II is the worst ruler of all time, which certainly he is not. He is not the worst ruler of all time. But he didn't become a saint of the church due to his political ambitions or his political goals. You know, the First World War was a failure. And his major humiliation was the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, which is also the same year of Bloody Sunday. And Bloody Sunday was really the beginning, many scholars argue, is the beginning of the revolutionary fervor that sort of colorized Russia during this period and culminates in the 1917 revolution. So my goal today is to actually state the positive things that Tsar Nicholas did. For example, expanding the Trans-Siberian Railway and creating railway across all of Russia. Not just important economically, which it was, but militarily. Now, unfortunately, militarily is where much of the, you could say, controversies emerge regarding Tsar Nicholas. He takes over Russian command during World War I, which ultimately leads to his abdication as Tsar. Why? For all of the great qualities that Tsar Nicholas had, and we're going to get into all of them. Incredibly pious man, an honest man, a man with integrity, a man who loved Russia and loved the people that he was ruling. but you can't say that he was necessarily a military genius. And so him taking full command of the Russian Empire, the Russian military during World War I, turned out to be foolish. And it allowed all the failures of Russia to be pinned squarely on the Tsar himself. And the same thing was the humiliating loss to the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War. At that time in Russia, the Russians, including Tsar Nicholas, but the Russian sentiment was Japan was still a backwards country. Japan was still a country that needed aid. It wasn't as sophisticated. It didn't have Christianity. It didn't have all these other cultural achievements. And then losing to them in the Russo-Japanese War totally shattered the image of what the Russian Empire was that really got going with Peter the Great. Peter the Great winning the Great Northern War against Sweden, conquering, establishing the new capital, St. Petersburg, named after Peter the Great, St. Petersburg, or even Catherine the Great after him, who expands the Russian territory and basically creates what we would consider modern Russia. It's Peter the Great that begins to modernize, and Peter the Great had some problems, right? So he, because of his infatuation with Western Europe, also had negative impacts regarding our Orthodox faith and our Orthodox theology. But Peter the Great, Russia, though they, the Great Northern War, they end up winning that. They end up taking territory. They end up growing the Russian Empire. Catherine the Great follows that up with expanding the Russian Empire, building more infrastructure, taking over Crimea, right? Catherine the Great, I shouldn't say Saint, Catherine the Great conquers Crimea, which is then lost by Nicholas I. But by the time of Nicholas II, Crimea is already back under the auspices of the Russian Empire. So just looking at Russian history in general, yes, unfortunately, Tsar Nicholas, he was basically put in a very difficult position where he had a modern economy and he had a political structure that was pre-modern. And he had and again, orthodoxy is pre-modern. But the elements of the Renaissance that started to creep into Russia through Peter the Great, the Enlightenment by following czars after, including Catherine the Great. But then by the time of Tsar Nicholas II, the majority of the aristocracy was already sort of modern European gentlemen. They were no longer the pre-modern Orthodox elite. These people were not solely devoted to the church anymore. And so Tsar Nicholas then is standing in a position where his whole rule, the autocracy, the divine rule of the Tsar, is dependent upon, one, the people believing in the importance of the katechon, the person who's going to keep chaos at bay, the person who's going to be the father of the nation himself. And it depends on the aristocracy and the elite making sure that society runs, that institutions work, and all this stuff. Well, we see by the time of Tsar Nicholas II, the aristocracy is already moving on the outward trend. They're wanting to be more modern Europeans. And then with Bloody Sunday, which we're going to get into, Bloody Sunday, 1905, when the peasantry, and many of which were devout Orthodox Christians, along with an Orthodox priest, moved to the capital city, when the Tsar isn't even there. He's with his family, I believe, in Crimea, and the soldiers, the guards of the palace, open fire on the faithful Orthodox peasantry, that's why so many scholars highlight Bloody Sunday in 1905 as really the beginning of the revolutionary fervor that ends in 1917. But Tsar Nicholas has to deal with the fact then that his administration, his empire, his soldiers end up opening fire on the people who he needs to maintain his power. So he's in a position where all of the foundational elements that allowed the Tsar to maintain his autocracy, to maintain the 300-year Romanov dynasty, is falling apart. And that's where when kings and generals ask, is Tsar Nicholas the worst leader in world history? Of course not. And you almost feel bad for the guy because he's in such a difficult position. It's like he can't win. And I think that's where some scholars have argued the reason why the Bolsheviks were successful in Russia and not other places is because they had already began the modernization process. And it didn't need to be so extreme in the case that the Russian Revolution was. Because it really was the ending. I mean, 1917 really is the ending of the old world, the pre-modern world, the monarchical, the Byzantine eagle, unifying church and state. That it is really the end of that. And we've talked about how World War I is the end of the pre-modern world. You are forcibly into the modern world at that point. So, Tsar Nicholas, I mean, he's the continuation of the Muscovite aristocracy, the sacred kingship. He was advanced paternalistic rule, and he maintained moral legitimacy. I mean, he was a good person. However, at that time, the modern sentiments wanted procedural legitimacy. They wanted parliaments. They wanted constitutions. They wanted to move beyond the monarchy. They wanted to move beyond religion itself. I mean, many of these people were interested in secularism. Now, you had the White Russians. You had the pro-monarchists. But the anti-monarchical fervor, which, of course, one of the reasons why Tsar Nicholas is falsely accused as being an anti-Semite is because it's known that he read the Protocols on the Elders of Zion, which, yes, it's probably a forgery, that he believed that many of the Russian Jews in his empire, that obviously at that time, many of which were living in the Pale Settlement, that they caused societal disturbance. They increased a revolutionary spirit. And he said these things, which turned out to be absolutely true in the case of the Bolshevik Revolution, which we know was at least 85% Jewish. Right? That's just a historical fact. But because Tsar Nicholas was already highlighting how, this is one of the problems, because Tsar Nicholas entered into a modern political arena, he did not appreciate the newspapers. He did not appreciate public opinion. He did not appreciate the impact of ideology, things like Marxism. He was still living under this belief, having grown up under Alexander III and his grandfather, Alexander II, who was assassinated by the revolutionaries, decades previous. He assumed that he was still in this pre-modern world, which he no longer was. And so his rule, he didn't play the game of politics very well. Public opinion matters incredibly to rule a nation by the turn of the 20th century. And Tsar Nicholas didn't appreciate that fact. And so it's unfortunate, but it's these modern, the rise of the newspapers, of the media. Who was running the newspapers and the media in Russia? The majority of them were anti-monarchical. This is where, honestly, when we start to get into Rasputin, so many of the legends about Rasputin, I tried to dig down into these. I watched the conversation with the Alex, the archivalist that Anthony Westgate talked to. Watched that whole thing, and then I tried to go through what are the accusations against Rasputin and find out where they came from. What did I find? The vast majority of all the accusations against Rasputin came from news media, mostly anti-monarchists and Jews, along with falsified police reports by people who already had a political incentive. And the same thing's true with Tsar Nicholas. Tsar Nicholas, he couldn't control the fact that the media was totally under or out of control, out of his control specifically. And so they're able to write anything and everything that, again, catalyze the revolutionary fervor of the time. But what did he do positive? What are the things that Tsar Nicholas absolutely did positively? He preserved the Russian Empire another 23 years. Now, mind you guys, the revolutionary spirit that was already ignited in Russia was very well present before Tsar Nicholas. It was his grandfather, Alexander II, that was killed by revolutionaries. Now, his dad ends up dying from liver failure, and that's why Tsar Nicholas then has to rise to the throne really unprepared. This is one of the reasons why so many historians say that he just didn't know, because Tsar Alexander III, his father, was expected to reign for like another 10, 15 years. Nobody expected him to die so quickly. And so when we look at Tsar Nicholas's life, he was educated in language. I mean, he spoke fluent English, German, obviously Russian, French, I think Italian. He spoke like fluent 6 different languages. He was, his cousin was King George. His cousin was Kaiser Wilhelm. Like, this dude was, again, the family was connected with all of Europe, who, again, Kaiser Wilhelm, who he's going to go to war against in World War I, which, to Rasputin's credit, allegedly, Rasputin told him, do not go to war against Austria, against the Germans. It's going to be the death of Russia, which it turned out to be. But he did preserve the Russian Empire for another 23 years. The Romanov dynasty was 300 some years long of his people ruling the country. He oversaw real economic modernization, as I said, the Trans-Siberian Railroad, industrialization, modern industrialization. He was actually able to build factories and industry, which caused part of the peasant uprising against him, because then they're living in squalor in these urban environments where they're able to build factories and build industrial capitalism entering into Russia at that period. But then the peasants wanted better working conditions, so Tsar Nicholas oversaw the emancipation of the peasantry that his father set forth. But it's like the historical factors, the historical context he found himself in was just too much to handle for anybody. It's not just him, for anybody. He avoided personal tyranny. Now, he made a lot of blunders. His rule was not incredibly successful. Even the church recognizes that his rule as czar was not successful. That's not why he's a saint. He's a saint because his entire life he was a pious Orthodox Christian. He was a saint because he loved his wife and his family, and he loved his people, and he truly, I'm convinced, he truly wanted to do the best he could for Russia. Unfortunately, it's like the hemophilia of his son Alexei is symbolic of the whole thing, right? His son Alexei, this is what brings Rasputin into the whole story, as I'm sure many of you guys know. Grigory Rasputin, this potential mystic, and we're going to get into, is he the devil, as everybody claims, or is he an Orthodox saint, or is he a holy man? We're going to get into that later. But you look at the role of the blood of Alexei. So it's because Alexei, the heir to the throne after Nicholas, he has hemophilia, meaning his blood does not coagulate, meaning his blood does not stop. If there's a wound, we should grow and have a scab, right? The white blood cells build red and white blood cells, end up coagulating and creating a scab and stopping the excretion of blood. Well, he was a hemophiliac, so he couldn't do that. And you think of it, I was thinking of this just as an Orthodox Christian from a symbolic perspective, and you think of how blood, you have the blood of the church, the blood of the martyrs. You have the heir to the the Russian throne, and his blood cannot stop from being spilt. You see what I'm saying in regards to like a symbolic lens here. You look at, it's the blood of Alexei that brings Rasputin into the scene. Blood in Orthodox theology itself represents life, judgment, witness. And it's like Tsar Nicholas, no matter what he wanted to do, there was like God's judgment was facing Russia. Now, there was plenty of still pious Orthodox Christians, and another thing I would say in regards to a positive benefit of the rule of Tsar Nicholas was that the Orthodox Church thrived. The institution of the church was thriving under Tsar Nicholas. However, to my point, just like when we did a stream over on Helena Blavatsky last week, who also comes out of this aristocratic elite within Russia, many of the aristocratic elite were kind of moving away from orthodoxy. Many of them were pro-monarchist, and they weren't even true, like, devout Christians. the modern sentiments of Western Europe were absolutely palpable amongst the Russian aristocracy at this point. And that's what I mean about the judgment. And so you have Alexei Nikolaevich, the son of Nicholas, and he's heir to the sacral monarchy, born to rule, and yet can't contain his own blood, right? The life of the nation, the life of the Romanov dynasty. He's a king who can hold, he bleeds invisibly, internally, unpredictably, just as Russia itself, in a way, was bleeding socially, spiritually, and politically beneath the intact exterior. And then it's this blood of Alexei that brings Grigory Rasputin into this, who we're going to get into who is Rasputin, was he a good character or not. But you see Bloody Sunday, more bloodshed. Bloody Sunday, 1905. What happens? The soldiers of the Tsar open fire on the pious Orthodox Christians, thereby cementing the idea that the Tsar is no longer with the people. But it was a total accident. The Tsar wasn't even there. The Tsar didn't want that to happen. The Tsar truly loved the people. But in the minds of the people, these were faithful people coming to the palace with icons, clergy, with the peasantry, coming with icons, coming with things, venerating Tsar Nicholas as the catechon, as the divine ruler chosen by God, and then his soldiers open fire on him. More bloodshed, more blood spilled, right? The faithful of the Orthodox who were coming not to chastise Nicholas, they just wanted some reform. They wanted some change, right? The working conditions, the social environment of Russia at the time, they wanted some change. They needed it. And what happens? They get shot by the Tsar's soldiers, which in that culturally and socially, what that did is cement the idea that the Tsar isn't with us, which was already cemented, again, done at the coronation of Tsar Nicholas. Before he's even fully Tsar, during the coronation, there's a stampede of the people who want to witness his coronation as Tsar. 1,000-some people killed, just trampled by other people. And then the Tsar says, oh, what a tragedy. I can't go to the ball tonight because there's this huge ball. It's for the aristocracy. It's for the Russian elite. And he said, I can't go. What a tragedy. Over 1,000 people just got killed today at my coronation. And his uncles then convince him, no, you must go to the ball anyways. So then he goes to the ball, and then the imagery of the Tsar being coronated earlier in the day, 1,000 people, over 1,000 of his people dying, at being stampeded, then see him at the ball, it creates this aura of, oh, the Tsar doesn't care about us. The Tsar doesn't care. And you look at the blood of the church. You look at the history of the Russian church. It's just interesting to interpret the whole story symbolically from the perspective of blood. The blood of Alexei, the blood of Tsar Nicholas and the martyrdom, the blood of Bloody Sunday, the blood of the Bolshevik Revolution, the blood that brought Rasputin into the story, into the fold. It's interesting. So, anyways, guys, smash that like. We got so much to get into. If you guys, again, the 50 super chat goal here is to sponsor another stream. Who sponsored today's stream? You guys did. The audience did. You guys sponsored this stream today. So I want to give a major thank you to everyone out there. You guys are the best. If you would like to sponsor another stream, you can contribute to the 50 super chat goal today. If we hit 50, then I'll allow you guys to end up choosing another stream. So smash that like, guys. If anybody is interested, now, as I said, I'm flying down to Texas this week to work on a project with Chase Haggard, who looks like Tsar Nicholas, and the Wilsons. But if you want to be part of our community, when I get back, we'll be diving into the next chapter of the Orthodox Survival Course. We're going to begin meeting every single week. It appears to be on Tuesday. The guys just voted on setting up a new time in which we are going to meet every single week instead of doing it every other week. We're going to start meeting every week, and it looks like the guys have chosen Tuesday. So Tuesday evenings, once I get back from Texas, are going to be the new nightly meeting over at the Logos Academy. We'd love to have you guys. If anybody would like to sponsor a stream, again, today is a community-sponsored stream. You guys sponsored this stream by reaching the 50 Super Chat goal last time. We set that as the objective. If anybody else would like a sponsored stream, you can sponsor a stream by using this link right here, and I'll reach out to you and we can set something up. If you haven't already got the incredible, the ultimate Orthodox Christian critique of transhumanism, you must do so. And you can get an author-signed copy over at my website. I just sent a handful out today. So if you've ordered one, I'm up to date now on my website. If you've ordered a signed copy, it is in the mail. And if you'd prefer to get one, but you want to save a little bit of money, you can do so over on Amazon. I just ask that please leave me an Amazon 5-star Amazon review. It'd be greatly beneficial to help in my book get a little bit more reach out there on Amazon. If you guys are interested in peptides, go to leveluphealth.com, use promo code COTEL, C-O-T-E-L, promo code COTEL, C-O-T-E-L, and you will get a discount on everything from BPC 157 to neurotropic peptides, whatever it is that you may be interested. Highly recommend. Also, if you're in the market for any Orthodox items, check out orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL, C-O-T-E-L, and you can get prayer robes, incense, reading study Bibles, flags, whatever it is that your heart desires for a discount. You'll be able to help me out as well as a good Orthodox company here in the United States. So check that out if you guys are interested. And that pretty much does it. Also, let me throw one in. If you guys are wanting, I am not in the market of convincing anyone to do anything. However, if you are a man or a woman, I guess, but mostly men, and you are a nicotine user, I do recommend Alp nicotine pouches. I have an affiliate link in the video description. Use that. You'll get a discount on Alps. I'll share it real quick here in the chat. And I promise you, you will agree these are the best nicotine pouches on the market. Okay, so again, today, major thank you to you guys for sponsoring today's stream. Josiah Elleron gets us started in regards to the 50 Super Chat goal to sponsor another stream by you guys. You guys pick the topic. This is community sponsor. He says, getting us off the ground and running on the goal. Thank you so much, Josiah. God bless you, brother. And Kristen throws in 5. God bless you, sister. She says, for the goal, have fun in Texas. Say hi to Rachel for me. God bless your project. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. I will absolutely do that. I look forward to linking back up with the Wilsons and Chase. I haven't seen Chase since his wedding. So being able to spend some time with Chase Haggard and his wife, it's going to be a lot of fun. So it looks like it's going to be a 4-day work week here down in Texas. So I had to come on here then and get this stream done for you guys. You see, I wasn't going to allow myself to promise you a community-sponsored stream on Tsar Nicholas and Rasputin and not deliver before I left. So Josiah Elleron throws also another $10 in over on Streamlabs. Thank you so much, Josiah. He says, God bless you. Thanks for doing the stream today. Well, thank you, Josiah. And Derek's Fly Fishing throws in 5. Says, for the goal and because I'm not a homosexual. That's true. You guys heard it here. If you're not a homosexual, you should probably help us reach the goal for another sponsored stream. That's all super chats on YouTube today are going towards sponsoring another stream. You guys get to choose what the topic is. Okay, so I got some videos I want to work through with you guys, but I want to do kind of what I did last time is slowly work through my study guide. And every section then has a video that we're going to watch to reinforce. So the first one here is, who is Tsar Nicholas? So I talked a lot from the macro perspective on his reign, talking about, if you listen to secular historians here, they're going to be very, very critical of Tsar Nicholas. As I said, some people claim he was a total bumbling idiot, that he ruined Russia. I wouldn't argue that. I would argue that he was basically dealt a hand of cards that you could never win with them. He had an antiquated structure. He wanted to preserve the monarchy because he was a faithful Orthodox Christian, and yet the peasants and the aristocracy wanted reform. They wanted constitution. They wanted a parliament. They wanted to vote. They wanted to basically do away with the Tsar's power, which was the problem. Chair-throwing Italian throws in 5, says, them Alps be do hitting me something fierce. Go for 3 milligram or lower if never done them before. Yeah, definitely do 3 milligrams. I mean, chair throwing Italian, I wouldn't expect you to be the kind of man I am. I wouldn't expect that. I wouldn't expect you to throw in 9s regularly. I wouldn't expect you to be able to actually handle your nicotine. No, I'm kidding. Love you, chair throwing Italian. God bless you, brother. Thank you very much for the support. And do use the promo code on the Alps. I'm telling you, if you like nicotine pouches, Alps are where to go. I talked with Jay. Jay's now using Alps. Jay's using Alps. You guys may have seen it. Alps are where it's at. So thank you so much, chair throwing Italian. Alex throws in a generous $100. Thank you so much, Alex. He says, big thanks to you and all your work you are doing. Your channel was helpful in me learning a lot about Orthodox Christianity back in 2023. Well, glory to God, brother. Coming from a New Age type background. No, same here. That's probably why we resonated. I was eventually baptized in 2024 on Lazarus Saturday. Well, perfect Saturday to be baptized. You were brought back from the dead, essentially, as a New Ager. God bless you and your family. Well, Alex, God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for that generous support, man. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. So who was Tsar Nicholas II? What is the historic context of Russia during this period? You always got to know the context, right? This is why I love these historical streams. I know some people don't. You got to know your history, though, guys. If you don't know history, you have amnesia. You got to learn your history. What is the historical context of Russia at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century? Rapid industrialization. Now, it's historically an agrarian society, very spread out, living off the land. But because it's now entering into the end of the 19th century, the late 1800s, we're full blown into the Industrial Revolution. And in a sense, Russia's getting left behind. They have all these natural resources. But places like England, for example, are just crushing the Industrial Revolution. Now, if anybody, anybody's read Charles Dickens or anything like that, you realize it wasn't very good during the Victorian era. Wasn't great for the poor people working those industries. They had child labor and all that different stuff going on in England at the time. But look at the amount of production the island of England was able to produce during this period compared to all of Russia. Russia realized, we got to industrialize to keep up. And we're in such a good position because look at all the natural resources we have compared to our competitors, rivals, allies over in Europe. And so autocratic political traditions in tension with modern constitutional pressures from Western Europe. This is huge, right? You have to realize that Nicholas II was inheriting an empire where the peasantry was splitting in regards to their support for the monarchy, that now the faithful Orthodox continue to support him. But as I said, Western Enlightenment sentiments are seeping into Russia and causing turmoil. You have the media, the newspapers that are putting out articles that are anti-monarchical. You have all this stuff going on that's influencing. So if Tsar Nicholas had the whole aristocracy but didn't have the peasantry, he may have been able to maintain the empire. If he had all the peasantry but lost the aristocracy, he still might be able to maintain the empire. But the support for him was split among the aristocracy and the peasantry, and that's why he constantly had to concede. He lost his leverage due to the sentiments of the people he's trying to govern. Orthodox sacral monarchy confronting secular ideologies, socialism, Marxism, and then imperial overextension, both geographically and administratively. So formation and personal worldview. How was Tsar Nicholas educated? Well, he was educated in military discipline, Orthodox piety. I didn't find any source during my research that contradicted the idea that he was a faithful Orthodox Christian his whole life. He was, and that's part of why he felt so bad about his abdication. Obviously it's humiliating. You go from the beginning of your reign, the total autocratic leader of your country, although, again, many political tensions and instabilities already arising in Russia at that period. But by the end of it, you've abdicated. Now, first he gives a constitution, he creates the Duma, then he throws out everybody in the Duma 2, 3, 4 different times. I think twice, actually. I think it was twice. Twice he fully basically undermined the Duma and brought new people in because he didn't like the policies they were making, to eventually totally abdicating your throne. And the reason why it hurt Nicholas so much, it wasn't just about the power, it's the fact that he truly believed that the Tsar was chosen by God, the Orthodox Church was true, and that he just lost it. In a sense, he failed. He failed a divine mission. And this is why he's a saint, because he dies as a martyr. He never once, he didn't cheat on his wife, right? For example, we talked about Saint Stephen the Great of Moldavia, arguably one of the greatest Christian warrior kings of all time. Built all these monasteries after every battle, incredibly devout, but he had a problem with adultery, right? Every man has a vice. With Tsar Nicholas II, I'm not sure what exactly his vice was, but it wasn't adultery. The man loved his family. The man loved the church. The man truly believed that he was commissioned to be the Tsar. And I think that's partly why, it broke him so much, and that's why he's venerated as a saint. The entire Romanov family that was murdered by the Jewish Bolsheviks, just shot point blank in their basement. It's because they went to their martyrdom still professing Christ. That's why they're saints. And I have a whole section here. We'll get to it. The canonization of Tsar Nicholas. We'll get to that. So, some people have argued that he lacked preparation for governance, however. So no training in political economy. And this is where he just wasn't savvy as a politician. He did not care what the newspapers said. He didn't think that the spreading of Marxist ideology was going to be a total threat, even though he was very suspicious of Jews living in the Pale Settlement. And he failed to curate true public opinion. He allowed the public opinion of himself to get out of hand. And this allowed a revolutionary mythology to replace the sacral myths or the sacral traditions of Russia, the Orthodox Church. I mean, this is what allowed the Bolshevik Revolution to occur in 1917. He had no exposure to adversarial politics, no cultivation of executive decisiveness. The same thing that's said about Donald Trump was said before Donald Trump about Tsar Nicholas, that whoever the last person he spoke to is probably the decision he's going to make. Tsar Nicholas was an incredibly honest man. He was an integral man. But when it came to political decisiveness, he didn't know who to listen to. Does he listen to his uncles? Does he listen to his political advisors? He didn't know who to listen to. He didn't know what decision to make. Again, he's in an incredibly difficult historical position to maintain the monarchy in Russia in the first place. And because of that, his indecisiveness, it allowed people to think he was weak. And that's what, even amongst the aristocracy, some of the early supporters of the Tsar became to be detractors of him because they felt like his indecisiveness was a sign of his weakness and inability to be the Tsar. Contemporaries consistently described him as personally gentle, courteous, family-oriented, morally earnest, but politically indecisive, emotionally withdrawn under pressure. And again, he totally understood himself in light of the Orthodox understanding of a national leader. His family life, obviously he marries the German Alexandra Fedorovna. She changes her name. She's actually a Hesse, I believe. So she's a German princess that he marries. But they have a deep emotional dependence between spouses. Much more romantic. This is where you could say Tsar Nicholas and his wife truly loved each other. You look at the history of czars. I don't know how much of Russian history you guys have looked at. But there's a lot of marriages that it's not exactly a loving relationship. A lot of it is due to political necessity, political power, political maneuvering, dynastic connections. But Tsar Nicholas and his wife, they truly loved each other. That is unique when you start looking at some of these major leaders, like true romantic relationships. He absolutely loved his wife. They shared a religious mysticism. His entire family and children were devout Orthodox, and increasing isolation from court elites. Alexandra's German origin and intense religiosity alienated the nobility and public alike, especially during World War I. Now, she converts and becomes a faithful Orthodox Christian. But we talked about the hemophilia of Tsarevich Alexei and created acute dynastic anxiety because he's the heir. He's the heir. But isn't it ironic, the symbolism here, God's providence, that the heir to the Russian throne is a boy who can't stop bleeding? It's like the blood of the church is just being spilled, right? He's not going to be heir, right? It's so symbolic. I feel like maybe I'm over hammering that, but I don't know. We'll get into Rasputin here in a few. So Tsar Nicholas takes the reign in 1894, and this has to do with his father, Alexander III, dying suddenly due to liver failure. And so the consequence, decision, Nicholas II ascends to the throne at the age of 26. Can you imagine being 26 years old and being the leader of the largest European empire, Russia? Pretty incredible to think about. Immediately affirms commitment to unrestricted autocracy because he believed it was God's will. Monarchy was God's will. He believed that his job was to continue it after his father or grandfather was assassinated by revolutionaries to destroy the monarchy, after his father made concessions and emancipated the peasants to, again, demonstrate the effective rule of the monarchy. He thought it was his to uphold the legacy of his family and his fathers. He must continue the autocracy of czarship. Consequence, it signals continuity with Alexander III's reactionary policies. It alienates reform-minded elites. Why? Because the aristocratic elites were wanting major reform. They wanted Russia to look more and more like Western Europe at this point. And it establishes the tone stability over experimentation. So while Europe is experimenting, Western Europe experimenting, Tsar Nicholas said, no, we need stability. We're going to maintain the monarchy. We're going to give small, minor reforms if necessary. But every reform he viewed as a concession of the Orthodox Church. He viewed every reform as a concession of the theological understanding of the Tsar himself. By 1896, we have the coronation tragedy, which is where, as I said, at least 1,300 people were stampeded over and killed at his coronation, which he then goes to the royal ball that evening. And so public perception of indifference when Nicholas attends a diplomatic ball that evening. Now, he wasn't going, that's the irony of Tsar Nicholas, is like his heart was always pure. He didn't want to go to the ball, right? We have historical evidence where he said, I can't go. The people, 1,300 plus people were just stampeded at my coronation. I can't go to this royal ball. And his uncles, it was like three uncles, no, said, you have to. They convinced him. And so begrudgingly, he ends up going to the diplomatic ball that night. And it immediately, the first day after his coronation, or the day of it, it begins to tarnish the public opinion of Tsar Nicholas, that he's totally indifferent to the people, in which he actually wasn't. He actually was not. But that perception, how do you get over that? 1,300 people are stampeded and you go to a diplomatic ball and everybody sees it in the newspapers. So it becomes a symbolic stain on his reign, reinforcing an image of detachment, which really wasn't who the Tsar truly was. 1897 through 1904, industrial growth, political status. This is huge. Rapid industrial expansion. Nicholas supports state-driven industrialization under Finance Minister Sergei Witte. Consequences, positive ones, massive railway expansion, growth in heavy industry, rising urban working class, which actually then comes to be also a criticism of the peasantry because the living conditions in these urban environments wasn't great, where it wasn't great anywhere in Europe, really. I mean, go to England. Those weren't great either. But the negative is that urbanization intensifies the labor unrest, which allows the revolutionaries like Lenin and Trotsky that every time these peasants have an uprising and the Tsar then has to put down the uprising, they spread more pamphlets. They write more newspaper articles. They spread more propaganda, right? And so you have to realize every decision the Tsar makes, there's propaganda being utilized to get more and more people to hate him. And then no parallel political reform to absorb new social forces. So you get in 1904, now you get the Russo-Japanese War, which was a total failure. Nicholas authorizes war to protect imperial entrance in Manchuria and Korea at Port Arthur. They're at the far eastern end of Russia, right next to Japan and Korea. Consequence, total military humiliation by Japan. Now, since Peter the Great, the Russian Navy was a force, right? Peter the Great invested tons of money into building up the Russian Navy, so it sort of mirrored the likes of Britain in particular. Well, they lose much of their Navy in this Russo-Japanese War. The Japanese absolutely annihilate them. And it shatters this myth of imperial invincibility. It shatters the myth that the Japanese are the backward ones and that the Russians are so advanced. This is what amongst the aristocracy, that was the belief. That's why they had even more indignation for Tsar Nicholas in this humiliating defeat against the Japanese, because how does Russia lose against Japan? What? This is impossible. And so it triggers domestic unrest, part of which leads to Bloody Sunday. And so 1905 to 1907, you get revolution and half reform. 1905, January 9th, Bloody Sunday. Troops fire on peaceful demonstrators petitioning the Tsar. And these were supporters. These were pro-monarchists. These were Orthodox Christians. That's why, and the Tsar wasn't even there. And yet it all publicly, again, through the propaganda, through newspaper, gets pointed back at the Tsar. He takes the blame for all of this. So the consequence, psychological rupture between Tsar and the people, nationwide strikes, mutinies, and unrest. Nicholas loses symbolic role as the little father, the Tsar of Russia. And this leads into the October Manifesto, that under pressure, Nicholas grants civil liberties, legal political parties, and elected parliament, the Duma. The positive results of this, now again, Nicholas was torn up by the fact he even had to make this concession, because he viewed it as a movement away from the way that the nation should be structured based on the Orthodox Church and his theological understanding. But it temporarily stabilizes the regime, essentially gives him another 12 years. It introduces constitutional language into Russian politics for the first time. So many of these reformers were absolutely ecstatic with the fact that there was some type of reform and a constitution was now present in Russia. The negative consequence, Nicholas views concessions as tactical and not principled. Trust between monarchy and society begins to totally collapse. And by 1906 to 1907, fundamental laws and Duma dissolutions, Nicholas reasserts autocratic supremacy, dissolves the first two Dumas when they challenge royal authority. And this creates a hybrid system, neither autocracy nor constitutional monarchy. Radicals reject reform, conservatives lose faith. You have the people that are telling the Tsar Nicholas, dude, don't concede anything. Just use, the power of the throne and just squash this stuff. And then you have people like, no, you got to conform, but then he doesn't go far enough. And so again, what is the theme here of his political reign? He cannot appease anyone. He's constantly in the middle. He's lukewarm on almost every issue, which just causes more ire directed towards him. 1908 to 1913, stabilization without transformation. The Stolypin reforms. Nicholas backs Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin. Agrarians reforms. Consequence, peasant land ownership increases. Some rural stabilization. Reforms negatively are incomplete. Stolypin assassinated in 1911. Nicholas fails to protect and continue reform momentum, which, again, why would he want to continue or maintain reform momentum? And then the Romanov Tercentenary celebrates 300 years of Romanov rule in 1913. Consequence, apparent resurgence of popular loyalty, mask underlying fragility of institutions, and last moment of imperial confidence. 1914 to 1916, this is where his rule totally begins to break down, is the decisions during World War I. And so Nicholas commits Russia to war in defense of Serbia, an alliance of obligations. Obviously, Ferdinand gets assassinated in Serbia, and Russia now come to the aid of Serbia because the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is getting ready to go to war against Serbia, right, after the assassination. That's how World War I gets kicked off, right? A lot of conspiracy theories about who was behind the shooting, who ultimately wanted the war to happen. We're not going to get into any of that stuff right now. But immediately, because Russia viewed itself as the catacomb, not of just the Russian people, but of all Orthodox Christians, they had an alliance with Serbia, which they still have today, to protect Serbia and to protect Orthodox Christians, generally speaking. So he commits Russia to World War I immediately. Consequences: initial patriotic unity, severe strain on economy and logistics, massive casualties. What happens to Russia during World War I? All you have to do is remember massive casualties. Nicholas, in 1915, September, he personally assumed command of the army, and this was a catastrophic decision because it ended so badly. All of the blame of what occurred in World War I on the Russian side is pointed directly at Tsar Nicholas II. He lacked strategic competence. Military failures became personally attributed to him. The capital was left under Alexander's unstable regency, and the court politics destabilized. Talking about the Rasputin controversy, he's there trying to command the military, and you got people writing newspaper articles claiming that Rasputin's sleeping with his wife. I mean, difficult situation to find yourself in. So war intensified economic collapse, food shortages, and popular radicalization. And then 1917 is the collapse and abdication. In 1917, the February Revolution, Nicholas delays response to strikes and bread riots in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. During the February Revolution, Nicholas abdicated with minimal resistance. The monarchy collapsed with astonishing speed and revealed an institutional fragility of the Romanov state. Army unites mutiny against the Tsar. Government is in paralysis, and the elite and military withdraw support. By March 2nd of 1917, total abdication. Nicholas abdicates to prevent civil war. He ends the 300 years of Romanov rule. Provisional government assumes power. Autocracy collapses with minimal resistance. And everybody knows what happens in 1918. Nicholas lives under house arrest, remains politically passive, and then is martyred with his entire family in July of 1918. So, what is his historical interpretation? Competing interpretations? It depends on who you ask. Who you ask is going to dictate what is said about Tsar Nicholas II. If you ask a liberal historiographer, Nicholas was an anachronistic autocrat, meaning he was a man who was essentially made for a time 200 years before he lived. And that's why he couldn't keep up with the modernizing tendencies and the modern demands of the peasants and the aristocracy. If you ask a Marxist, they would say Nicholas was an inevitable casualty of class struggle. He just didn't care about the peasantry enough. He didn't care about their working conditions. He didn't do enough to liberate the serfs. So it's all about class warfare. If you ask revisionist historians, they say Nicholas was a tragic ruler overwhelmed by structural forces, which I would say, if you're secular, that is accurate. I mean, he was up against modern forces, political forces, a historical context in which it was a losing battle from the get-go. But from the Orthodox perspective, he is a saint. Saint Tsar Nicholas II is a passion bearer, embodying humility and suffering rather than political success. It is his ability to suffer, which really, once you reframe everything I've just said about the reign of Tsar Nicholas to the fact that it is perpetual suffering. It is perpetual suffering. His reign was never what it was intended to be. His child the heir to the throne, crippled by hemophilia. The total abdication, the continual concessions he makes to appease the people he's ruling. It's almost a massive humiliation that he lived through. And this is why, from a spiritual perspective, as an Orthodox Christian, you should find inspiration from Tsar Nicholas. Through all of the suffering, he never lost his humanity. He never lost who he truly was. And so with that, I want to now turn our attention to a video. So smash that like, guys. Really appreciate you. ICXC Nika throws in $6.99, says, also not a homosexual, sending support from Alberta, Canada. Hey, from the sovereign nation of Alberta, or soon to be. God bless you, brother. Thank you for the support. Christopher of Pennsylvania throws in 5, says, fellow heterosexual and nicotine user here. Big thanks for helping me get into orthodoxy. Well, glory to God, brother. That's great. And Austin DeTulio throws in 10, no comment. Thank you so much, Austin. So just a reminder, guys, today's stream is sponsored by you guys. So we achieved a 50 super chat goal in which I told the audience you guys could pick a stream topic. This was the topic the audience overwhelmingly chose. And so we're doing the same thing today, guys. If we can get 50 super chats by the end of this stream, you guys can choose another sponsored stream. Now, I have a couple more I need to do before I'll do our community one, but that is the incentive. If we can reach the super chat goal today, you guys can choose another sponsored stream. Okay, so here's the Ortho Wiki article. I'm going to share that with you guys if you want on Tsar Nicholas. It talks a little bit about his life and his glorification on there. Not a whole lot. I've already covered probably much of what needs to be said. Bloody Sunday, again, this was a huge turning point in his reign. Obviously, the most notable is the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, but really, the forces that led to that begin in 1905. This little video, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I just want you to see how secular people, secular scholars view St. Nicholas. And this is where we have to be honest as Orthodox Christians. We have to be honest about the shortcomings of his reign. But his life as an individual is incredibly admirable. That's the difference. So this is, I'm just going to play a quick little section of this just to get you a feel for how secular scholars tend to interpret the reign of Tsar Nicholas. It's not exactly, not exactly heartwarming. Let me make sure okay.
The following years of Nicholas II's reign were rather uneventful. Things were quite...
So we're going to begin with, it goes over his life, his education. We're going to begin with the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. This total humiliating failure of the Tsar.
The following years of Nicholas II's reign were rather uneventful. Things were quiet at home, with no real change or any indication of the imminence of the revolution. Just like his predecessors, Nicholas II was keen on playing the game of imperialism, being particularly active in expanding Russia's sphere of influence in China and the Far East in general. This put him on a collision course with Japan, and a war between the two nations started in 1904. Overconfident in a victory over what it saw as a backward Asian nation, Russia instead suffered a humiliating defeat. The army of the Tsar lost all the major battles in the war, saw a significant portion of its navy decimated, and suffered a major blow to its economy in the process. The technological inferiority of the Russian Empire, most clearly visible in its logistical challenges, was laid bare in the Russo-Japanese War. At a time when other great powers were industrializing and building their railroad infrastructure rapidly to maximize their economic output and be ready to move their armies quickly in case of war, Russia was still largely an agrarian country, depending on an incomplete Trans-Siberian railway for logistics. Part of this was simply due to the vastness of Russia, But slow industrialization was also caused by the autocratic nature of the Romanov dynasty, including the reign of Nicholas II, who resisted reforms that could have empowered entrepreneurship due to fears of decentralization and consequent political demands. The humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and the economic problems caused by it were partially responsible for further tension in the Russian Empire. In late December, workers of St. Petersburg went on a mass strike that paralyzed life in the capital. However, Nicholas II and his government only started to truly lose control following the events which would later be called Bloody Sunday. On January the 22nd, 1905, a huge procession of workers, led by an Orthodox priest named Gapon, began moving towards the imperial residence of the Winter Palace to present their petition asking for political, economic, and educational reforms, including the creation of a parliament. Many demonstrators carried the portraits of Nicholas II, which was an indication of their continued belief in the benevolence of their father Tsar, but their illusions were shattered when imperial troops opened fire on them, killing hundreds of workers. This ignited a revolution, with demonstrations, strikes, terror, and ethnic strife spreading throughout the Russian Empire. Attempts to suppress the revolution were in vain, and the bankruptcy of the absolutist Romanov monarchy against the powerful societal forces demanding changes in the Russian Empire was apparent. Unable to suppress the revolution, Nicholas II reluctantly signed the October Manifesto in 1905, granting the constitution and civil rights to the people of the Russian Empire, and promising to hold elections to the legislative body known as the Duma. Until the last moment, Nicholas II was against granting civil and political rights to his subjects, saying, "I cannot squander a legacy that is not mine to squander," in reference to centuries of the absolutist rule by the Romanov dynasty, and blaming his prime minister, Witte, for this terrible decision, as described in his diary. However, Nicholas II clearly saw the October Manifesto as a temporary measure to appease the Russian public before he could roll back the promises of reforms. A few months after proclaiming the October Manifesto, he signed the Fundamental Laws in April 1906, which stipulated that the emperor must confirm any laws adopted by the Duma. He then dissolved the First and the Second Dumas, which became the center of opposition against absolutist rule. He then changed the electoral laws, ensuring a higher degree of loyalty from the Third and Fourth Dumas to the throne. Simultaneously, Tsar Nicholas appointed Pyotr Stolypin as the prime minister. Stolypin, a conservative statesman often compared to Bismarck for his vision and actions, played a key role in suppressing dissent and solidifying the absolutist rule for one last time, but also in enacting many overdue reforms to ease the tensions in the country. Stolypin gained popularity in conservative and moderate circles for his successful reforms. However, instead of relying on Stolypin as a chance to save his absolutist rule from demise, the insecure Nicholas was growing restless with his popular and strong-willed prime minister. The Tsar once wrote in his diary, "Stolypin imagines himself to be indispensable." That said, the biggest cause of tensions between Nicholas II and Stolypin was not purely political. It was about a mysterious and shady man who became a spiritual guide and a part-time doctor for the Romanov family, Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin.
We're going to get into Rasputin later, so I don't want to, give too much away right now. But we're going to now focus to another video where it talks about what Tsar Nicholas did in regards to World War I. So this is a really good video. It's from the Great War YouTube channel. It's just videos about World War I. Again, if you're a history buff like myself, you love history, it's a very useful channel. But here is him talking about Tsar Nicholas II and his taking over the sole control of the military during World War I, which was a massive, unfortunate, massive failure, and allowed all the negative consequences of the First World War that happened to Russia to be pointed back to Tsar Nicholas and him taking responsibility for it.
Were disastrous for Russia, with the catastrophic losses at both Tannenberg, Willie. The early weeks of the war were disastrous for Russia, with the catastrophic losses at both Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes, But the Russian army fought far better in the winter and spring, crushing the Turks at Sarikamish and nearly destroying the Austro-Hungarian forces before they were reinforced by Germany. A late spring and summer offensive by Germany and Austria smashed the Russian army, though, and huge swaths of Russian territory were overrun. All Russia was in shock, and against the advice of his ministers, Nicholas took control of the Russian army September 5th, 1915, which may well have been the greatest mistake of his entire reign. He removed Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich from command, paralyzing the army, which was severely lacking both weapons and ammunition anyhow. And though Nicholas allowed his chief of staff to plan strategies, it was Nicholas that was blamed for every defeat and failure. And as he held the line at his headquarters in Belarus, he put government affairs into his wife's hands. She was strongly influenced by Rasputin, though, a charismatic mystic and faith healer. Under his influence, ministers were dismissed seemingly willy-nilly, destabilizing the government ever more until it finally ground to a halt. The harsh winter of 1917 just made it worse. There were food shortages everywhere, and the starving nation craved peace. Nicholas and Alexandra's reputations were abysmal, with he considered a failure in the field, and she, following Rasputin's terrible advice, even being called a German spy.
Now, we're going to push against the idea that Rasputin was totally controlling her and the Russian government from the royal palace or anything like that. There's really no evidence. So he is, the gentleman of this YouTube channel is kind of taking for granted the very negative connotations around Rasputin and who he was and just building off of that. This is what, again, many of the newspapers, many of the anti-monarchists, some of the Jewish community, the Bolsheviks, and many of the aristocracy. The aristocracy hated Rasputin because he was a peasant and he didn't deserve to be in the vicinity of the royals like the aristocrats were. They were annoyed by him. They viewed him as lesser. He shouldn't be there. The fact that he even was able to draw the ear of the Tsar and his wife, they found to be problematic.
Rasputin's assassination at the end of 1916 couldn't help their image. Revolution was in the air, and there were demonstrations daily. On March the 12th, 1917, soldiers put down their guns and joined the demonstrations. It was the end of the empire. 3 days later, Nicholas gave up his throne. His brother Mikhail refused to take it, and 300 years of Romanov rule was over. Tsar Nicholas II was now plain old Nikolai Romanov once again. He and his family were taken into custody March 21st. They were moved several times, but once the Bolsheviks gained control of the country, the Romanovs were assassinated and mutilated. 18 family members and friends died, though the public was only informed about Nicholas. See, the other killings remained state secrets until 1925. So, Tsar Nicholas II, in many ways an incompetent and brutal emperor, responsible for millions upon millions of deaths, and certainly at least partly responsible for the ever-rising social inequality in Russia that led to revolution. And for our purposes, for this show, a flawed military leader who cost his country enormous amounts of European territory, but which gave rise to independent nations like Latvia, Finland, and Estonia. However, he and his reputation have seen a rehabilitation. In 2008, the Russian court officially decided the family were victims of political murder. And back in 2000, the entire family was canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church and have been worshipped by many as martyrs.
Actually, that occurs in 1981 is their canonization. I don't know where he grabbed the the year 2000 from, but yes, there has been a rehabilitation of their reputation. So now we're going to get into why they were Orthodox saints. Why are they martyred? Why, if Tsar Nicholas wasn't a fantastic ruler in certain respects, why is he so admirable? And so now I want to continue a little bit further to talk more about Tsar Nicholas and why he was a good man. So what did his reign look like? Well, although he's remembered primarily for collapse, his reign included real, if limited, successes, especially in administration, economic developments, and continuity of state power. We can skip most of these things. We've already kind of briefly discussed them. So, final evaluation I had as a political ruler: pious Orthodox Christian, personal integrity, commitment to order and stability, oversaw genuine economic modernization, tried to preserve the monarchy to the best he could, but inability to adapt these modern political structures, lost the support of his people, poor crisis in leadership, and failure to integrate modern mass politics. What do I mean by that? Public image, the influence of ideology, and media and propaganda, right? When you think of modern politics in the year 2026, what do you think of? Massive propaganda, censorship, right? So that is generally meaning the media, right? The media industrial complex. That is part of modern politics. Curating public sentiment, photo shoots, doing things to curate the image, whether it's real or not. This is modern politics. Tsar Nicholas did not do these very well. And then recognizing ideology and tainting ideology. So what do we talk about? Limited hangouts, the Overton window, the alternative movements that are arising. And let's just take the modern political sphere right now. Ideology is incredibly dangerous to political structures. But before the Bolshevik Revolution, ideology wasn't perceived in such a serious way that it is now. This is why censorship is so important. They can't let ideas spread because the ideas are catalysts to revolution itself. So why Nicholas is a saint and why that matters. So he's referred to along with his family as the passion bearers. And it's important to recognize what is referred to as the political failures as distinct from him as a man and a pious Orthodox Christian martyr. Okay? So he is not a political hero. He's not a saint because of his political heroism. He's a saint because they are martyrs in the strict sense, killed specifically for their confession of Christ in the Orthodox Church, they were not killed for being exemplary rulers, or they're not considered saints, or he's not considered a saint for that particular purpose. The church does not canonize his reign. So this is a crucial clarification. The Orthodox Church does not canonize Tsar Nicholas II's policies, decisions, or political judgments. What does the church, I had to look into, what does the church canonize regarding Tsar Nicholas? His personal piety, his repentance and humility, and his endurance of humiliation, imprisonment, and death without hatred. It does not endorse his political system, his governance as exemplary, or deny the real failures of his reign. The Orthodox Church, in fact, upon the canonization, there were critics. There were critics of Tsar Nicholas because of the reign. And it was important for the church to delineate why he is a worthy martyr and saint of the Orthodox Church and should be venerated and proclaimed as one, versus the Russians who are still kind of critical about his reign and seeing it as sort of the loss of Russia to Bolshevism. So this is how the church began to delineate who he was. So Orthodox theology allows a saint to be morally holy and practically ineffective in worldly roles. So the Orthodox evaluation of his failures within Orthodox discourse, especially in serious theological and historical circles, Nicholas II is often described as a righteous man placed in an unbearable role, a weak ruler facing unprecedented structural collapse, and a father and husband who succeeded where he failed as a sovereign ruler of his nation. His failures are acknowledged by the church, an inability to govern modern mass society, as we talked about, media, propaganda, public image, and ideological threats, poor political judgment during crises, over-reliance on court influences, and failure to restrain revolutionary forces. But these are framed as human limitations, not moral sins. And then the theology of the sacral kingship and its collapse are, as the last sacral czar, or Nicholas as the last sacral czar, Orthodox tradition understood the czar as the restrainer, the katechon, as I mentioned, the protector of the church and a symbol of cosmic and social order. Nicholas II embodied this vision sincerely, but history had already moved beyond it. The church interprets the fall of the monarchy not simply as political failure, but as a judgment on a society that rejected spiritual authority, a collective apostasy, not merely an imperial one. In this reading, Nicholas is less the cause of the collapse than its victim. Right? Isn't that interesting how you look at the historical framing of Tsar Nicholas and his reign and his canonization versus the secular histories, and they don't differentiate these things, right? From the Orthodox perspective, in a sense, he is a victim of historical context and circumstances. And even though he maintained his morality and his virtue as an individual father, husband, friend, his political reign was entirely ineffective and led to what essentially, from an Orthodox perspective, was a divine judgment that Russia was going to have to deal with. The aristocracy, the peasantry, they were accepting these revolutionary ideas. The aristocracy, as I already said, they were moving away from the Orthodox Church. They were viewing it as antiquated. They wanted to be part of modern Europe. They viewed themselves as modern European gentlemen, and in that sense, reason took a step above religious piety. And so repentance, abdication, and spiritual victory from an Orthodox lens, Nicholas's abdication is not viewed purely as cowardice or incompetence. Spiritually interpreted, he chose to avoid civil bloodshed. He accepted humiliation without violent revolt, and he surrendered power without bitterness. His final months, imprisonment, mockery, and deprivation are seen as his true ascetic struggle towards sainthood. Where he failed to rule, he succeeded in suffering, which is the point of an Orthodox Christian. And so in that sense, you can see how he's actually a great saint. He's actually a really insightful saint because everything worldly failed, but yet spiritually in his suffering, he succeeded. So why Orthodoxy rejects success as a measure of sanctity? Orthodox Christianity fundamentally rejects the equation that power plus success equals righteousness. The cross, not the throne, is the measure of holiness. Thus, saints can fail politically, kingdoms can collapse, God's purposes may be revealed precisely through defeat. Nicholas' second life is interpreted as a warning against conflating divine vocation with historical inevitability. So, all right, with that being said, let us jump back to this video that I want to show you guys about the canonization of him and his family. There it goes. Man, my internet is going slow today. I don't know what's going on. Major thank you to Total Gravity for the $20 super chat for the goal in the Emperor. Absolutely. Thank you for your daily tithing, Total Gravity. Everybody who is a parishioner of Church of the Eternal Logos, you must send in your tithes now. Again, reminder, we're trying to sponsor another stream. Today's stream is sponsored by you guys. You did this. And so if you'd like to sponsor another stream, if we can reach the 50 super chat goal, I will allow you guys, put up a poll, and you guys decide what the next community sponsored stream is. So that is what the goal is centered around. Okay, let's now check out this video on why Tsar Nicholas and his family were canonized.
Of imperial family, and above all, Tsar Nicholas II himself is not perceived. The canonization himself is not perceived. The canonization of the Romanov imperial family, and above all, Tsar Nicholas II himself is not perceived unambiguously by everyone. Quite often one hears questions: what did this Tsar do that made him canonized? Let's look at the facts. Execution in Yekaterinburg on the night of July 16th to 17th, 1918. Tsar Nicholas II, who abdicated the throne on March 2nd, 1917, his wife, Empress Alexandra, and their children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, were shot in the basement of the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg. During a service in the Kazan Cathedral in Moscow, Patriarch Tikhon declared just 3 days after the execution on the 8th of July, 1918.
A terrible...
I think that's supposed to be Patriarch Tikhon. I think this video, they did an AI voiceover or something, so it gets some of the pronunciations wrong.
thing has happened. The former Tsar Nicholas II has been shot. We must, obeying the teaching of the Word of God, condemn this act, otherwise the blood of the executed man will fall on us, and not only on those who committed it, We know that he, having abdicated the throne, did so with the good of Russia in mind and out of love for her. After his abdication, he could have found safety and a relatively peaceful life abroad, but he did not do so, wanting to suffer together with Russia. He did nothing to improve his situation, meekly submitting to fate.
In addition, the Patriarch blessed the church archpastors and pastors to perform memorial services for the Romanovs. According to Russian church leaders, the reverent respect for the Anointed One, characteristic of the Russian people, the tragic circumstances of his death, as well as the pity that the death of innocent children caused, contributed to the attitude towards the royal family, not as victims of political repression, but as Christian martyrs. Therefore, the veneration of the Romanovs began almost immediately and continued throughout the Soviet period. These sentiments were especially strong in émigré circles. Thus, in the émigré press, there appeared reports of miracles performed by the royal martyrs, for example, about the myrrh streaming of their icons. In 1981, the Bishops' Council of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad canonized the Romanovs. On July 16, 1989, a prayer service in memory of the Romanovs was held on the vacant lot where the Ipatiev house once stood. On August 18, 1990, a wooden cross was erected at this site, near which prayers and akathist were read several times a week. Meanwhile, there were many voices against canonization, especially of Tsar Nicholas II. His unsuccessful state policy was cited as an argument, including the Kudinka tragedy, Bloody Sunday, the Lena massacre, as well as his contacts with Rasputin. In 1992, by decision of the Bishops' Council, a synodal commission was initiated, which was tasked with investigating materials related to the martyrdom of the imperial family. As a result, the political activity of Tsar Nicholas II was separated by the Church from the period of spiritual and physical suffering that the last Russian Tsar endured at the end of his life. 5 reports devoted to the study of the state and church activities of the last Russian sovereign were submitted to the Synodal Commission for the canonization of saints. The commission decided that the activities of Tsar Nicholas II in themselves did not provide sufficient grounds for his canonization or for the canonization of his family members. However, the reports that determined the final positive decision of the commission were the 6th and 7th, the last days of the imperial family and the church's attitude to passion bearers. The majority of witnesses speak of the prisoners of the Tobolsk governor's house and the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg. The report, the last days of the Tsar's family, emphasized as people who suffered but were submissive to the will of God. Despite all the abuse and insults they endured in captivity, they led a pious life, sincerely striving to embody the commandments of the gospel in it. Behind the many sufferings of the last days of the Tsar's family, we see the all-conquering light of Christ's truth. It was the last period of the life of the members of the imperial family, spent in captivity, and the circumstances of their death provide serious grounds for glorifying them as passion bearers. They increasingly realized that death was inevitable, but they managed to preserve spiritual peace in their hearts, and at the moment of their martyrdom, they acquired the ability to forgive their executioners. Before his abdication, the Tsar said to General Dubensky,
"If I am an obstacle to the happiness of Russia and all the public forces now standing at its head ask me to leave the throne and pass it on to my son or brother, then I am ready to do this, ready to give not only the kingdom, but also my life for the motherland."
In the end, the following conclusion was given.
In the suffering endured by the royal family in captivity with meekness, patience, and humility, in their martyrdom, the evil conquering light of the faith of Christ was revealed, just as it shone in the lives and deaths of millions of Orthodox Christians who suffered persecution for Christ in the 20th century. It is precisely in understanding this feat of the imperial family that the Commission, in complete unanimity and with the approval of the Holy Synod, finds it possible to glorify in the Council of new martyrs and confessors of Russia in the rank of passion bearers Tsar Nicholas II, Empress Alexandra, Tsarevich Alexei, and Grand Duchesses Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia.
On August 14, 2000, at the Bishops' Council of the Russian Church, the imperial family was canonized as part of the Council of New Martyrs and Confessors of Russia, revealed and unveiled. It was also of great importance to church leaders that Tsar Nicholas II led a decent and pious life, he paid great attention to the needs of the Orthodox Church and generously donated funds for the construction of churches. All members of the imperial family, according to the Russian Orthodox Church, lived by the traditions of orthodoxy. One can have different attitudes towards the political activity of Tsar Nicholas II, but in this case, his personality is considered exclusively from the standpoint of the Christian worldview. With his martyrdom, he atoned for all his sins.
And there you have it. That's why Tsar Nicholas and his family are canonized in the Orthodox Church. As I said, no, he's not a successful ruler. No, he was not a political model, and no, he was not vindicated by history. However, what he was a faithful Orthodox Christian, a man who repented, endured, and forgave, and a witness that holiness is possible even in the face of catastrophic failure. So now I want to move our topic from Tsar Nicholas to Grigory Rasputin, a very interesting and enigmatic figure. It's very, very difficult to get any clear insight onto who Rasputin was. So I know for everybody who was asking in the chat, did you look at the Rasputin archive? Yes. I looked at the Rasputin archive. Alex, shout out to Alex, who was on Anthony Westgate's YouTube channel, and I believe the World War Now guys had him on as well. I did not watch the World War Now conversation, but I did watch Anthony Westgate and him talk about Rasputin. And who was Rasputin? In fact, I'm going to put up a poll right now for you guys and ask you, who was Rasputin? And then I'm going to go through all my document that is trying to both articulate what the typical historical perspective or what the typical narrative is surrounding Rasputin, and then to push back against it and highlight that there's really no concrete evidence for a lot of the scandalous narrative surrounding Rasputin. So we're going to do our best to actually provide a true objective stance on this from an Orthodox Christian perspective. And so I'm going to ask you guys, who was Rasputin? Good man, bad man. We'll just leave it there. So, who was Grigory Rasputin? Now, to understand the context here, remember Russia's spiritual landscape. Rasputin is one that first understood Russian religious culture, deeply sacramental and mystical, strong tradition, suspicion of rationalist Western elites. Of course, that's where the aristocracy was going, right? Counter to the cultural heritage of Russia. An endemic belief in charismatic, wandering holy men. How many saints, how many holy fools are present within Russian history? And so who was Rasputin? Well, he was actually born to a peasant family in Siberia. He was largely uneducated, even according to Alex of the Rasputin archive. He highlighted that he might be able to read a little bit, read and write, but not enough. And so any of the books or the writings that are attributed to Rasputin, he dictated to somebody else so that they could write them down. I know Anthony Westgate mentioned a book that he read and thought it was, or an article or a letter maybe it was a letter that was in an archive. And Alex let him know, well, he wasn't exactly highly educated, and so he probably dictated it to someone else. He undertook pilgrimages to monasteries and holy sites. We know for a fact that Rasputin went to Mount Athos. We know that he went to Jerusalem, obviously most likely the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and some monasteries around there. Traveled to holy sites throughout Russia and Eastern Europe. So he did his fair share of pilgrimages, and known for intense prayer, fasting, and emotional religiosity. There is no solid evidence he was ever formally a monk or ordained, despite later myths that have surrounded him. And so entry into early elite circles, Rasputin gained influence primarily because he appeared to alleviate Tsarevich Alexei's hemophilia. So before the Tsar, the family of Nicholas II brought Rasputin in, he did have a reputation as like a mystic, a healer. He's very charismatic. Now imagine Rasputin is this disheveled man. He almost looks homeless. And according to multiple reports, now again, it's hard to know anything concretely about Rasputin because he had so many detractors. So much of the history is tainted that it's really hard to get a clear picture. But what's generally assumed is that he didn't smell very well. He didn't bathe regularly, which again was off-putting to the aristocracy to see this man, holding conversations with the royal family and potentially, at least according to, now these may be salacious rumors, but he didn't smell very well. He didn't bathe as frequently as people would have preferred. At least that's alleged. We don't know that for sure. He inspired profound trust in Empress Alexandra. So there was a handful of instances, but the hemophilia, Tsarevich Alexei punctures his skin, he starts bleeding, or he's getting a bruise that just won't stop bleeding. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And there's one point in which Rasputin writes to Alexandra that God has heard your prayers and the boy will survive. And the next day, the bleeding stopped. And this was the first major event which cemented in the mind of Alexandra that Rasputin really was a spiritual holy man and a healer, a mystic of some sort, potentially a wandering holy fool. But again, never ordained. He's not actually a monastic. And he spoke in a language of simple repentance, humility, and faith. So we're going to get into, because I'm going to play some videos. So in my document, I didn't include all the salacious stuff. I do have a section that describes what he's accused of, but I'm going to show you the vast majority of videos. It is so hard to find a video on YouTube that does not equate Rasputin to like the devil or like this just demonic figure, this master manipulator, this lunatic, charismatic figure. So I'm going to play what people say, and I'm going to try to demonstrate to you the alternative perspective. So what Rasputin's actual influence is that he did not control state policy. So we saw that in the Kings and Generals video and the Great War video, that Rasputin basically was dictating what was going on while Tsar Nicholas was leading the military during World War I. Not exactly the case. Now that was a rumor. Now, that was written in the newspapers that said Alexandra, the Tsar's wife, is basically letting Rasputin rule the Russian Empire from St. Petersburg, from the royal palace. Not exactly. There is no concrete evidence. So what I found is the things that people cite are typically police reports, which were often done by anti-monarchists, which embellished whatever the police report was. And they took them off rumors. So, for example, there was instances where people would just call or contact the police. I don't know if they called, but they contacted the police, and a woman would just make up, or somebody would make up an accusation about Rasputin, and then they would document that. And those documentations have been used to portray who Rasputin really was. So he did not control the Russian government. He had no formal office. His advice was inconsistent and often ignored, despite what people will say. Like, I have a video that literally, I'm going to show you guys, acts like Rasputin basically took over the Russian Empire. His influence was exaggerated by rumor and propaganda. And in this, you can even find academic secular scholars agreeing to these points. Yet perception became reality through all the polemical propaganda by the anti-monarchists. Court legitimacy eroded. The monarchy appeared spiritually compromised. They claimed that this man was a charlatan. And Rasputin became a symbol of corruption regardless of the facts. So the Steelman argument that Rasputin was a genuine Orthodox holy man, this was my best attempt to basically be on the side of the Rasputin archive, Alex from the Rasputin archive, and say, what do we know for a historical fact about Rasputin? And is there more good or more bad? Here's the Steelman of him being good. He did emphasize repentance. We know that. He practiced long prayer vigils. He spoke constantly of human sinfulness, and he rejected bourgeois moralism in favor of inner transformation. So very orthodox from that perspective. I described that his spirituality resembled a sort of folk asceticism, not academic theology. This man was not highly educated. The healing of Tsarevich Alexei Multiple witnesses attest to this. So Alexei's bleeding crisis stopped after Rasputin's prayers. Even skeptical doctors were baffled by it. Rasputin often insisted medical intervention cease, which may have worsened bleeding. Now, one of the things that is true in this case is that they were giving Tsarevich Alexei aspirin every day. Now, anybody who knows a little bit of what aspirin does is it thins your blood. So if you have hemophilia and you already have a problem of allowing your blood to coagulate so it stops bleeding and form scabs and stuff like that, giving that child aspirin only makes the hemophilia worse. So Rasputin telling Alexandra, hey, stop all the secular medical stuff that you've asked your doctor, stop those. Well, they stopped giving him aspirin. Obviously, he's going to do a little bit better. Now, that's not me trying to claim that Rasputin wasn't a mystic or anything. My point is that his advice to the Tsar's wife was apropos. It was true. He told her, hey, stop doing the medical interventions, and they stopped giving him aspirin, and he actually started to do a little bit better. That does not mean that his prayers or any sort of mystical healing wasn't the case. My point is that he told her to do something that, even if from a total secular rationalist perspective, was beneficial. So, alignment to traditional holy fools. He does sort of resemble a holy fool figure. He's, again, what we're told, he's socially scandalous. We're gonna cover that. Morally ambiguous, spiritually penetrating, and unsettling to the elite. Now, that is a fact. We know that very, very few aristocrats like the guy. And such figures historically provoke outrage, not admiration. Political propaganda and demonization. Arguments in his favor note anti-monarchist press weaponized his image. Sexual allegations often rest on holistic or unreliable sources. And I'm going to show you a video, a guy who presents himself as a historian, right? Big YouTube channel. He knows all the facts about history. Just wholesale says all this stuff about Rasputin, that he was a cult leader, that these women believed that he was Christ, that he claimed that he was Christ in the second coming. I looked into it. I could not find any source that actually said that Rasputin claimed he was the second coming of Christ. But that's what they claimed, that he had this megalomaniacal understanding of himself and equated himself with God. Now, that was the rumor. I could not find evidence of that anywhere. I could find of those accusations. There are written historical accusations of that, but remember the political and cultural tensions at the time. Aristocratic hatred was class-driven. That was a fact. And many stories originate from his murderers, which we're going to get into. There's a lot of speculative theories about who actually murdered Rasputin. Anywhere from British agents to a cross-dressing homosexual that Rasputin was trying to actually do gay conversion therapy with. The man was a closeted homosexual who enjoyed wearing women's clothes. He was a transvestite. And according to the Rasputin archivist Alex, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second, the man that he believes actually killed Rasputin. Now remember, when Rasputin is killed, he's shot. And then he's not killed when he's shot. He then goes and attacks the people trying to shoot him. And then they end up shooting him in the forehead. And they do terrible things. Like, his body was mutilated. His genitals, when they found his body, his hands were tied. And his body was mutilated. His organs were protruding. His male genital, like I said, totally mutilated. So these are some really sick people, which the genital mutilation makes me agree with Alex that the man who killed Rasputin may have been the man who he was doing gay conversion therapy with and was trying to help him with his homosexuality. And that's why he had like this sort of vengeance that when it unleashed resulted in him disfiguring Rasputin's genitalia. Like, what? We'll get into all that in just a second. So Rasputin may have been less depraved than legends actually suggest. And that is what the Rasputin archive was trying to present. Martyr-like death, qualified claim, but he's not canonized. So Rasputin is not a saint of the church, but he was murdered extrajudicially, meaning somebody took it upon themselves and they shot the guy. His killing was ritualized and symbolic, and his death functioned as a sacrificial purge of imperial guilt. Some see this as a proto-martyrdom, though it is highly contested. Now, what is the argument that he was this lunatic charlatan the whole time? Well, I put documented sexual moral scandal. Now, remember, all these accusations are coming from unverified police reports and newspapers, which were mostly Jewish, and many anti-monarchical influence. So bias, source indicate chronic drunkenness. Now, he did drink. That is one thing we do. Rasputin was a drinker. Was he the alcoholic they depict him as? Is that he's just totally sloshed all the time? I highly doubt that. But it is a fact that he was a drinker. We have people that drink with him. We have people that were actually somewhat fond of him that talked about how he drank. So he was a drinker. A sexual exploitation of his followers. There's all these claims that he had sexual orgies, that he had all these different girlfriends. It is true that many women believe that he was a holy man and a mystic, but there isn't any evidence for all these sexual legends about him and the orgies and all the girlfriends. I couldn't find anything. Manipulation of devout women, cult-like behavior. Theological deviations. Rasputin was associated, rightly or wrongly, with the ideas of salvation through sin, a very Kabbalistic, occult understanding, erotic mysticism, antinomian rhetoric. This is where I've heard people claim that he was like a secret Kabbalist, that he actually was putting forth a sort of Jewish, Kabbalistic, mystic spirituality in the name of orthodoxy of some sort. But here's the problem with all this stuff. Here's the problem, is that we have so secular historical, and then the testimony of the church that the Romanovs, Tsar Nicholas II and his family, were incredibly pious Orthodox Christians. Now, if Rasputin came in to their life and was spouting all these anti-Orthodox doctrines, don't you think that they would have probably picked up on that? These were highly educated people. And so my big thing on some of these theological errors that they claim that Rasputin had is, if it was the case, why did the Romanovs still trust him? It doesn't make any sense unless, again, these are all exaggerated. What about spiritual delusion? Many people claim that he was under a sort of spiritual prelest. Charismatic gifts without humility is what they claim. Lack of obedience to church authority, confusion of emotional intensity with holiness. Miracles do not sanctify the person who performs them, is the perspective of the church. And so people argue that this whole mystical healing and stuff, he was like a master manipulator through hypnosis. I watched one video that argued that Rasputin was an expert in hypnosis, and that's how he convinced these women, these Orthodox Christian women, to believe in his mystical healings and his charismatic abilities. Catastrophic symbolic damage. Regardless of intent, Rasputin's presence fatally undermined the monarchy. That's just a fact. He fused mysticism with incompetence, at least perceptively by the critics, and he scandalized both church and state, at least according to the legends that got propagated through the media. A lack of ecclesial recognition, as we said. And so what kind of evidence do we even have about Rasputin? We do not have a criminal conviction, which seems like if he was committing all these salacious crimes, he would. We have no ecclesial condemnation by a synod, which would be strange. If a man who was a massive heretic and manipulator was influencing the royal family, you think the church would have said something. This is before the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, they had total authority at this point. As I said, the Orthodox Church as an institution was thriving under Tsar Nicholas. But we don't have any condemnation. What about a trial transcript? We don't have any trial transcript of Putin or Rasputin. Contemporary medical diagnosis, none. Neutral police surveillance records that were not politicized. I told you, when I looked into it, I found that so many of the police reports that are used as historical evidence are totally politicized. It's quite clear that this is not a non-biased source of information. What we do have is police reports often commissioned with intent to malign him, memoirs written after 1917 to malign him, testimony of political enemies, sensationalist journalism, a small number of sympathetic ecclesiastical witnesses, later Soviet propaganda, and Western polarizations. Claims of sexual immorality. What are the sources? Police reports. And Rasputin was politically controversial. Reports frequently record hearsay, not witness acts. They would develop a police report on a person talking about hearing about a story, and they would write it down because they wanted to malign the man. Informants were often aristocrats or clergy hostile to him. No arrest, charge, or prosecution followed. Testimony of Iliodor, a former ally turned bitter enemy, authored scandal-heavy memoirs, explicitly sought Rasputin's destruction, later embraced revolutionary rhetoric. But Iliodor is considered deeply unreliable, motivated by revenge and notoriety, and contradicts himself repeatedly. About women's accusations, several women claimed impropriety. No sworn testimony under oath. Interesting. No corroborating evidence. Many accusations surfaced after Rasputin's political vilification, as if it was all part of an agenda. And some accusers were connected to anti-monarchist circles. Claims of drunkenness. Again, he did drink. We do know that. They're Russians, right? They're Russians. Multiple independent witnesses, including neutral observers, report that Rasputin drank alcohol publicly. We know that. Frequented taverns and was at times visibly intoxicated. Okay, fair enough. But Orthodox context matters. Alcohol consumption does not equal chronic drunkenness. Russian peasant religiosity often tolerated periods of excess, meaning drinking alcohol, and many recognized holy figures that they displayed scandalous behavior. So historians usually conclude that Rasputin did drink, but claims of constant debauchery are exaggerated. Well, about sexual exploitations and cult behavior, the weakest claims, right? I'm going to show you a history channel that is totally built on this. And if you look into the history, this is the weakest claim you can find about Rasputin. There's just no historical evidence. These claims largely originate from yellow press articles, so propaganda, anti-monarchist pamphlets, and Soviet-era historiography. No consistent pattern, no verified victims, no ecclesial inquiry. Modern historians such as Douglas Smith and Joseph Furman note the sexual myths of Rasputin grew exponentially after his death. This is a classic case of symbolic scapegoating. And so, if you guys want all this, again, this document's available for anybody over at the Logos Academy. If you guys want, I'm going to end right here by saying I did find, and this was mentioned by Alex over on Anthony Westgate's interview with him, talking about the true history of Rasputin, that St. John of Kronstadt met Rasputin. How many of you guys knew that? So this is a true canonized saint of the church. St. John did meet Rasputin early on before Rasputin became a political symbol. The strongest historically defensible claim is St. John initially regarded Rasputin as a sincere peasant pilgrim, not as a fraud. Now, that does not mean that Rasputin could have been a fraud. It seems unlikely, though. The more you get into it, the more unlikely it seems. However, if you're an Orthodox Christian, this should carry some serious weight. St. John of Kronstadt did not view him as a fraud. This comes from multiple contemporaries, clergy memoirs, and early correspondence references. There's a famous quote. It is disputed. I did find scholars that dispute whether this is true or not. But according to other scholars, there's a famous quote of St. John of Kronstadt saying, "There is something truly of God in him," referring to Rasputin. And so, scholarly judgment, he initially viewed Rasputin positively, St. John of Kronstadt. He withdrew publicly as controversy grew. He never issued a formal denunciation of Rasputin, but never canonized Rasputin in word or deed. This supports the claim that early impressions were favorable, but later silence should not be turned into endorsement or condemnation. Now, the other one is St. Theophan of Poltava, and he kind of has a different trajectory than St. John of Kronstadt. Both are canonized saints. That's why I thought this would be useful information. Saint Theophan is the most important Orthodox saintly witness regarding Rasputin, generally speaking. This is where a lot of people take a more negative perspective towards Rasputin. He initially defended Rasputin as a man of prayer. He believed accusations were exaggerated and warned against slander of Rasputin. Now later, Saint Theophan began to change his tune. After extended observation, Theophan reversed his position. The most reliable paraphrased judgment attributed to him is, Rasputin was a man who began in sincere repentance, but later fell into spiritual deception, prelest. However, Theophan did not call him a conscious fraud. He did not accuse him of doctrinal heresy. He focused on spiritual delusion, not scandalous crimes. Now, was St. Theophan influenced by some of the propaganda at the time? Possibly. I don't know. But this assessment comes from letters, later ecclesiastical testimony, and multiple corroborating clerical sources. So, with that being said, that is kind of what we do know about Rasputin. And now I want to play and show you guys how different the verifiable history. Again, there's not a lot. There's not a lot. That's the whole problem with Rasputin, is that there's not a lot to verify historically as fact. But yet people make all these outrageous allegations against him as if it is total fact. And so let me show you here. First, I want to show you, this is from the Rasputin archive. So this is Alex. He was on Anthony Westgate. I highly recommend. And he has this. So he believes that this gentleman right here is the one who murdered Rasputin. Again, there's a lot of theories of who actually took the shots and killed Rasputin. According to Alex at the Rasputin archive, he argues that Felix Yusupov, Rasputin's murderer, was a well-known transvestite who Rasputin was treating for homosexuality. This is him as a transvestite, wearing a woman's skirt. Apparently, he liked the feel and the attention he gained by going to clubs and social events dressed as a woman. And so here is the little article that Alex included in his post on X. He says, Felix also soon discovered a penchant for dressing in women's clothes for parties. He discovered he enjoyed the clothes and the attention he received from men. Nicholas, not Nicholas, the Tsar Nicholas, this is the brother of Felix, the transvestite. His brother is named Nicholas. Nicholas, Felix's brother, encouraged this and brought Felix in dresses out to debaucherous parties with him. He began performing in drag at a cafe in St. Petersburg called the Aquarium, until his mother recognized him during one of his shows that she happened to attend. Imagine you're just a Russian babushka and you go to the Aquarium, some social cafe, and your son is dressed like a woman and you had no idea he was a transvestite. Until his mother recognized him during one of his shows that she happened to attend. Although the scandal was kept secret, it ended Felix's performance career. He continued to dress in drag for parties, however, until his father learned of these pranks and furiously threatened to send him to a Siberian convict settlement. His dad basically threatened to send him to the gulag if he didn't stop wearing women's clothes. So this is interesting, though. If the killer of Rasputin is Felix Yusupov, and there was this transvestite homosexual, it makes sense why they mutilated Rasputin's genitalia. And so I want you guys to check this out. I'm going to share the link. Check out, if you want to find some more of this interesting information, this is the Rasputin archive. This is his X account. You can go over a lot of his stuff. He has really long articles on his Substack, and they're pretty good. It's him going back and forth. Like his more recent one is talking about whether Rasputin is an Orthodox saint or not. And he goes back and forth with another article trying to present the negative opinion of his canonization. The Rasputin archive is obviously very supportive of Rasputin. So I'm not here to endorse the opinion of, actors in the church that are more critical of Rasputin or those that believe that he's absolutely a saint or should be venerated. My point is just try to present some type of concrete information that we can at least have a better perspective and you can make your own informed decision. So that's his X account. Now, this is a massive YouTube channel called Biographics. It has 2.44 million subscribers. This video has 5.1 million views, and I just want to play a little bit of it to you guys because you're going to see all the stuff that I just went over and that I researched for today's stream regarding, you know, the debaucherous accusations regarding Rasputin, that they don't have a lot of objective foundation to it. They really do not have strong supportive evidence. It's mostly allegations and propaganda. Doesn't mean some of them may or may not be true. I don't know. He's an enigmatic figure. A lot of this is hard to prove. But watch this YouTube channel. He takes all the sensationalist lies by the anti-monarchist, the Jewish media propaganda, and Soviet-era historiography, and he just presents this as total historical fact. Watch this.
Rasputin lived in an apartment in St. Petersburg where his followers could come and have meetings with him. Women would all show up with a hot dish and they had potluck-style parties. They gathered around a table with him sitting at the center. Rasputin would sit in silence, staring into space, when suddenly he would begin to mumble something. The women would immediately stop talking in hopes of understanding what he was trying to say. He would then grab paper and desperately write down whatever was on his mind. For some insane and inexplicable reason, this was incredibly attractive to these women. They believed that he was the second coming of Christ, and they would offer to go with him into his bedroom and have sex with him.
No evidence for that. Only sensationalist propaganda claims that all these women were sleeping with Rasputin. We do not have credible evidence for that. But see how he's presenting this to... Again, this is probably the biggest video on YouTube regarding who Rasputin was.
In particular, Olga Lokhtina had so much faith in him that she left her husband and children in order to live in his apartment. She forced everyone to address him as God. Witnesses opened the back door to see Olga holding his penis and screaming, "You are Christ, and I am yours." And
I mean, just what? What? And this guy believes all this stuff?
Whoever walked in on this unfortunate scene while they slowly backed away, shutting the door on their way out. After learning about this scandal, police officers were ordered to follow him to see what he would do. They reported that he would hire prostitutes on almost a daily basis and bring them into bathhouses. Now, you would think that if he was paying for a bath on a daily basis, he might actually smell good, but according to testimonies, he would bring a prostitute into a private room where they would both get undressed.
According to testimony. What testimony? What testimony? Guys, I spent hours trying to find if there was actual evidence of these things. Because if there was like somebody who said, no, I was there, I witnessed it, I wanted to know. Like, was there Orthodox Christian, was there clergy that claims that they saw him doing these sensationalist things or sexual acts with these female followers? Couldn't find a single concrete piece of evidence. This is just all the mythology surrounding Rasputin, and this is why people believe that he was like this devil. I mean, look at his video. Grigory Rasputin, the devil incarnate. The devil incarnate. It's just all the most sensationalist claims ever presented or accused of Rasputin presented as actual history.
He would then take his leather belt and begin beating the woman, claiming that he would beat the sin of lechery out of her soul. Then he would have sex with her and leave the bathhouse without even touching the water. He was once witnessed leaving a bathhouse and screaming at the demons that he could feel inside of him. He would say that he could see the devil in himself, and he said that there was a battle over his soul going on. Now, obviously, this might sound like he was tripping on one of the many drugs that he happened to be taking. But remember those two priests, Bishop Hermogen and Iliador? Well, they happened to hear about Rasputin screaming about demons in public, and this was damaging their reputation since they were the ones who introduced Rasputin to St. Petersburg society. Hermogen and Iliador ambushed Rasputin to confront him about what he was doing. They accused him of using the devil to have these healing powers. Hermogen grabbed Rasputin by the penis and screamed that he was thinking with that rather than his brain. These two came prepared with a giant wooden crucifix, which they used to beat him just about as bloody as he would beat those prostitutes in a bathhouse. But the power of Christ did not compel him. Rasputin tattled on them to the Tsarina, saying that they were trying to murder him.
Really? You guys really? I mean, what person thinks that that sounds like a real story? An Orthodox priest walked up to Rasputin and grabbed him by the dick? What? What? This is presented as like a history channel on YouTube. Again, 5.1 million views on this video. The most viewed video about Rasputin on the internet. What? That sounds believable? What? This guy's so full of it. This guy's so full. This is no, absolutely. This is the type, the type of this is what the majority of people watch by. Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm sure he's never stepped in an Orthodox church. That's why, I mean, if anybody was going to do like a biography on Rasputin, why wouldn't you look at what the Orthodox Church has to say about Rasputin? It's actually very level-headed. There are some clergy that sort of buy the propaganda, and maybe it's true, we don't know. But there's other on the opposite side, and most of them are somewhere in the middle. What? Here's a section on the devil in St. Petersburg. And guys, there's basically no videos outside of the Rasputin archive, Alex appearing on World War Now and Anthony Westgate. Those are like the only videos I could find that were positive about Rasputin. Every single thing you find online right now is negative. It's a very negative connotation. Parasocial Turpentine throws in 5. Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate your support. God bless. Again, we're trying to reach 50 for another sponsored stream. Dama Chinin throws in 5, says the Orthodox Church's canonization of Tsar Nicholas II for his morality and devotion despite his failings as a leader is beyond wise and gives me hope. Glory to God. Absolutely. No, Tsar Nicholas was a great man. He may not have been a great national leader in the historical context he was, but he was a great man. Josiah Elleron, thank you so much, brother. Throws in a generous $10, says, regarding Nicholas, a saint is someone who says yes to God, not without flaws, but constantly returning to God after failing. They align their will with his. Amen. Glory to God to that. That's exactly the case, Josiah. And over on Streamlabs, my buddy Matt Scroggins throws in $10 and says, let's hit that super chat goal, pay piggies. That's right. Where are all my pay piggies at? Where are the pay piggies at tonight? And Matt throws in another 5 and says, getting a deeper understanding of history has dramatically changed how I act and move through the world. It cannot be overstated how important it is to know and with viewpoints outside the corporate narrative. So, yes, I totally agree. Now, you guys kind of get the point about this guy's totally salacious depiction of Rasputin. This one is a little bit more moderated. It's a more moderate video. Let's see, which one's this one? Downfall of the Romanov family. And I want to play this one. This is a good little overview of who Rasputin was. It's not as sensationalist. It does kind of couch its accusations. I don't know if Ted Ed is going to copyright strike my channel, but we'll try it anyways. Robert Massey, there would be no Lenin without Rasputin. What does that insinuate? That the Romanov dynasty and the monarchy would have not have failed if it wasn't for Rasputin. I don't think that's the case. I think the historical context and circumstances, surrounding Tsar Nicholas's reign would have ultimately undermined him anyways, whether Rasputin was there or not. It's just a total over-exaggeration to blame the failings of the Tsar and the lead up to the Bolshevik Revolution on Rasputin. No, the anti-monarchists used him as propaganda, which, yes, catalyzed the opinions of other people, which caused revolutionary fervor, and it may have collapsed. But if Rasputin wasn't there, the trajectory was already the same. The trajectory had been the same for like 20 years. It was headed in that direction. M. Lasagna throws in 5, says, Dr. DPH, can a Chad like yourself square Rasputin being a super stinky, yet all the ladies are lining up to be with him? I mean, I don't know if he was super stinky. Like, there's all these legends that he had food in his beard. I mean, he does look disheveled in some of the photos. He does look kind of like a wandering pilgrim. But it's hard to know what, the facts about him. So, I don't even know if he was super stinky. He may have been. It's hard to exactly know what's true. Oh, Rasputin Archive is here in the chat. Hey, shout out to Alex. God bless you, brother. I watched your interview with Anthony Westgate in preparation for today's stream. So I listened to a lot of what you're talking about. It's very insightful, and I appreciate you providing an ulterior position on Rasputin and providing information I had never heard before. So really appreciate what you're doing over at the Rasputin Archive. God bless you, Alex. Appreciate your work. And Byzantine Soldier throws in $8.99. Oh, and Rasputin Archive said, this is great stuff, David. Thank you very much, brother. The rehabilitation of Rasputin continues. Absolutely. Byzantine Soldier throws in $8.99, says, there's a song from Boney M. What do you think about the song about Rasputin? I have no idea what song you're referring to. I apologize, Byzantine Soldier. I can't provide any opinion on that. I'm not totally sure. Rasputin Archive said, the idea that he was stinky was made up by Iliodor. So the same guy who went all the time to the bathhouses with women was also stinky. What the flip? I know, that's what I was saying about the biography channel guy. Oh, yeah, he would pay for a prostitute every day and take her to a bathhouse, but he would never shower, and he was incredibly smelly, but it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense. The more you look into these accusations, the less it makes sense. Boney M is unknown in the USA. I don't know who Boney M is, so sorry. All right, so this is TEDx's video on Rasputin, the mysterious life and death of Rasputin.
On a cold winter night in 1916, Felix Yusupov anxiously prepared to pick up his dinner guest. If all went as planned, his guest would be dead by morning, though 4 others had already tried and failed to finish him off. The Russian monarchy was on the brink of collapse, and to Yusupov and his fellow aristocrats, the holy man they'd invited to dinner was the single cause of it all. But who was he? And how could a single monk be to blame for the fate of an empire? Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin began his life in Siberia, born in 1869 to a peasant family. He might have lived a life of obscurity in his small village, if not for his conversion to the Russian Orthodox Church in the 1890s. Inspired by the humbled monks that wandered endlessly from holy site to holy site, he spent years on pilgrimages across Russia. On his travels, strangers were captivated by Rasputin's magnetic presence. Some even believed he had mystical gifts of prediction and healing. Despite Rasputin's heavy drinking, petty theft, and promiscuity, his reputation as a monk...
All allegations. Remember, I could not find any historical credible sources regarding his drinkiness, his salacious sexual life, all that stuff.
Quickly spread beyond Siberia and attracted both lay people and powerful Orthodox clergymen. When he finally reached the capital, St. Petersburg, Rasputin used his charisma and connections to win favor with the imperial family's spiritual advisor. In November 1905, Rasputin was finally introduced to Russian Tsar Nicholas II.
What also happened in 1905? We covered it today. Bloody Sunday in February. The beginning of the constitutional monarchy. The forming of the Duma in October. So 1905 is a big year. Remember, the beginning of the Russo-Japanese War was the previous year, which was a total failure and catastrophe for Tsar Nicholas.
Nicholas and his wife Alexandra devoutly believed in the Orthodox Church, as well as in mysticism and supernatural powers.
Which is not different from the Orthodox Church, right? That's what's so annoying, these Western people who make these videos. Like, the Orthodox Church is explicitly mystical, right? Being an Orthodox Christian and then being interested in mysticism as if it's like Western esoteric traditions. It's like, well, they're really a pious Christians, but they love Kabbalah. No, it's Orthodox Christian mysticism. It's the theology of the church, dude. Like, no, they're not like these secretive mystics, these esotericists or something like it's usually referenced in the West.
This Siberian holy man had them transfixed. It was a particularly tumultuous period for Russia and their family. The monarchy was barely clinging to control after the Revolution of 1905. Their political struggles were only intensified by personal turmoil. Alexei, the heir to the throne, had a life-threatening blood disease called hemophilia. When Alexei suffered a severe medical crisis in 1912, Rasputin advised his parents to reject treatment from doctors. Alexei's health improved, cementing the royal family's belief that Rasputin had magical healing powers and guaranteeing his privileged place on the royal court.
And Pasios, this is the second most viewed video on Rasputin. So you have this one who calls him the devil and claims he has a sex cult. This has 5.1 million views. This one by Ted Ed has 4.2 million views. I mean, so it's like fighting the accusations and the defamatory framing of Rasputin. A massive uphill battle. That's why shout out to Alex in the Rasputin archive, because the massive amounts of videos. I mean, you guys go on here, go on YouTube and you go find me pro Rasputin videos. Almost all of them are just so sensationalized. None of it is accurate.
Today, we know that the doctors had prescribed aspirin, a drug that worsens hemophilia. After this incident, Rasputin made a prophecy. If he died or the royal family deserted him, both their son and their crown would soon be gone. Outside the royal family, people had mixed views on Rasputin. On one hand, peasants regarded him as one of their own, amplifying their often unheard voice to the monarchy. But nobles and clergymen came to despise his presence. Rasputin never ceased his scandalous behavior, and they were skeptical of his so-called powers and thought he was corrupting the royal family.
This is interesting. I want to mention this because Rasputin, Alex, I believe that was what the description on Anthony Westgate's video said your name was. Alex, this is interesting because I did not know this. I did my own research for today's video, and I found multiple claims of this about the aspirin. You're claiming, and clarify in the chat if you could for me, brother, that there's no evidence at all that Alexei was taking aspirin, because I read that. I mean, again, as we know, many academics can be false on different things. I read that they were trying to rationalize, one article that I read was trying to rationalize the mysticism or healing potentials of Rasputin by arguing that Alexei was taking aspirin. Rasputin told them to stop taking aspirin, and that this then legitimately helped Alexei, and he was trying to rationalize away the idea that Rasputin had any sort of mystical healing or any sort of, So I'm curious, you're saying that there's no evidence that at all that Alexei ever was given aspirin in the first place? It is historical speculation that began with Pierre Gilliard, allegedly, and perpetuated by modern historians. Interesting. Well, I appreciate that, Alex, because it's hard to find a lot of... Dude, it's really... I give you credit for the Rasputin archive, because it's actually pretty difficult to get clarity on a lot of this stuff. He follows and says it's not necessarily a bad theory. There's just no proof of it. It could be taken as an example of clairvoyance, but in the end, it's all historical speculation. Yeah, fair enough.
By the end of World War I, they were convinced the only way to maintain order was to eliminate this sham of a holy man. With this conviction, Yusupov began to plot Rasputin's assassination. Though the exact details remain mysterious, our best guess at how it all unfolded comes from Yusupov's memoirs. He served Rasputin a number of pastries, believing they contained cyanide. But, unbeknownst to Yusupov, one of his co-conspirators had a change of heart and substituted the poison with a harmless substance. To Yusupov's shock, Rasputin ate them without ill effect. In desperation, he shot Rasputin at point-blank range, but Rasputin...
Now, I believe, Alex, in your video with Anthony Westgate, you make the point that Rasputin's daughters mentioned that he didn't like desserts or sweets, which makes this story also skeptical about the poisoning, because why would Rasputin just consume a bunch of desserts if he, according to his daughters, from what I believe Alex mentioned, if his daughters mentioned that he doesn't even like sweets? I thought that was a pretty interesting point you brought up. Yeah, he says, indeed, and no poison was found in his system anyway.
Recovered, punched his attacker, and fled. Yusupov and his accomplices pursued him, finally killing Rasputin with a bullet to the forehead and dumping his body in the Malanevka River. But far from stabilizing the monarchy's authority, Rasputin's death enraged the peasantry. Just as Rasputin prophesied, his murder was swiftly followed by that of the royal family. Whether the downfall of the Russian monarchy was a product of the monk's curse or the result of political tensions decades in the making, well, we may never know. To learn more about the revolution that
Rasputin, Alex said, I quote, "I have been studying occultism for a long time. People like Rasputin with such power come along once in several centuries." Well, guys, that pretty much does the stream for today. I hope you guys get a better idea about the life of Tsar Nicholas II, why he's a saint and why he's a good saint, right? And to be more conscious and aware of what his life was. We as Orthodox Christians, I've seen a lot of like Tsar Nicholas II type worship, or like not really spiritual veneration, but almost present him as this incredibly successful ruler, which is kind of divorced from the historical reality. But that doesn't diminish his status as a saint. That doesn't diminish his status as a martyr. It certainly doesn't diminish the status as a man who lived in history. Like as an individual man, Tsar Nicholas was an incredibly honest, integral, pious, loving father and husband. And so as a man, as an individual, he's an admirable character. Absolutely. And the willingness of the martyrdom, they knew they're going to be killed by the Bolsheviks. They're literally on house arrest. What do you think's going to happen to them? Do you really think the Bolsheviks were going to allow them to just go free? You think with Tsar Nicholas, his cousin being the Kaiser, Wilhelm, with his cousin being King George in England, you really think that they're just going to let him go without fear that he's going to, galvanize another military force and undermine their own political power? Of course not. He knew that they were going to kill him. He may not have known they're going to kill his entire family in such a ruthless way. But as an individual, Tsar Nicholas is an incredible man. And so his martyrdom, his family's martyrdom, his life, from an Orthodox Christian perspective, there's way more there than just the efficiency of the Russian Empire, when really he was caught in a position in which he could never win. He modernized the economy so that Russia could compete with the other superpowers of the world, but he was ruling over a pre-modern empire, and the influences of the Enlightenment and modernity were threatening to undermine not just the aristocracy, but the peasantry as well. Marxism was on the rise. The Bolsheviks were on the rise. And it just seemed like he was kind of caught in between a rock and a hard place. And it's hard to imagine, even if you were to sort of game plan it out, if you were to insert the ideal monarch for the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, could they salvage the monarchy during that historical period? Who knows? Who knows? But when it comes to Rasputin, too, another figure, enigmatic figure, very difficult figure to know real concrete facts about, but a slandered figure of history, arguably one of the most slandered figures of history. At least if you're trying to find credible citations and evidence for a lot of these accusations, there just isn't any. And so I encourage you guys, if you're interested in more information about Rasputin, do check out, and I'll share his X account again, the Rasputin Archive by Alex. And I'm going to share that link right now. So that is his X page where I found the post regarding the transvestite Felix Yusupov, the potential, and according to Alex, the most likely culprit in the assassination or potential martyrdom of Rasputin. So thank you guys for being here. Smash that like, and thank you for everyone who supported the stream. Cole throws in 5, says, in 100 years, TMZ and other tabloids will be considered reliable sources. Oh, no. Yeah. I don't know. I think the media landscape's changing. I think X is becoming where most people get their news. I think mainstream media, which includes TMZ and tabloids, have to become more sensational just to garner attention right now. Because if you're actually interested in like what happened, very few people are flocking to CBS website news page or something. They're going to X. They're finding their favorite journalist. They're finding their favorite investigator. They're seeing what they have to say about XYZ. That's what most people are doing. So maybe in 100 years, these things don't even exist. It's possible. Nathaniel throws in 10, says a cool story about Tsar Nicholas the First, or Tsar Nicholas I want to share, is when a new uniform and kit was set to be issued to the Russian military, he went on an 8-hour forced march on his own to test it. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Oh, here's Alex from the Rasputin Archive. Throws in another $10. Thank you so much, brother. He says, the occult stuff I sent was the first part of Yusupov's quote. The rest was, quote, no one can replace Rasputin. His elimination will have positive consequences for the revolution. Prince Felix Yusupov, transvestite and known homosexual. So if we were just trying to take the lens of our present day and we see the people who support transvestites, transgenders, pedos, and homos, probably that side is the wrong side of history. So if that is the individual that is speaking about Rasputin, maybe Rasputin was on the right side of history, right? I mean, it almost, just out of just deduction through sources, you almost have to lean towards a positive understanding of Rasputin just based on who's making all the claims. If you analyze today, like who's the enemies of truth and Jesus Christ, which Jesus Christ is truth. Truth is a who, not a what. But it's like the same forces also hated Tsar Nicholas and Rasputin. Can I trust the historical citations? Probably not. Austin DeTulio throws in 5, says, hit the goal. Thank you so much, Austin. How close are we to the goal? I haven't even checked. We got 30 more to the goal. And I got to get ready for my flight to Dallas tomorrow. So unless you guys really pick up the slack here and are able to hit the goal in the next few minutes, I don't think we're going to be able to, we're not going to make the goal of 50 super chats for another community sponsored stream. So let me just check Dono Chat and Streamlabs real quick. Over on Streamlabs, DFW Dude throws in 25. Thank you so much, DFW Dude. He says, looking sharp tonight, bro. Great stream. thanks for the discount on the peptides. Well, of course. And that's true for anybody out there. If you go to Level Up Health, use promo code COTEL, you get a discount on high quality peptides. That's why they're a little bit more expensive than some of the competing online stores. It's because I can guarantee the quality of these peptides. If you guys are interested, use promo code COLA at Level Up Health. But let's see what the poll comes up with. So analyzing the poll now, who was Rasputin? Good man, bad man? Looks like 68% of the audience says good man. I lean towards good man myself, just based on the accusations and who they're coming from. And then 32% of the audience tonight still says Rasputin was a bad man. So not everybody is convinced, but that's okay. You don't have to be, right? Makes their own decisions. That is fine. Prayers for safe travels in advance, Dr. DPH. Well, thank you very much. Yes. And, irony that the last super chatter was DFW, dude, because I'm flying to DFW tomorrow in the morning. So thank you very much, DFW, dude, for the support. Do appreciate it. And thank you guys for the YouTube support. A major thank you to Alex for the generous $100 super chat. Really appreciate you, my friend. But that looks like it's going to do it for me, guys. As I said, I get back from Texas Friday, so I got tons of clips already lined up for you guys. We'll be posting a video every single day of the week, and then I'll be back Friday, and I hope to get another stream out, be it Sunday or Monday, and we're going to knock through a handful of these sponsored streams I got. I think I got 5 lined up for us to do, and I got some other great topics like this was the Assault on Truth regarding Freud. And then here's a book that by Nicholas Goodrick Clark. He's a Western esoteric scholar on the occult roots of Nazism. Plan on doing a stream on that in the near future as well. So smash that like, guys. Thank you all so much for the support. And I will see you in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.